Are you in favor of that? Would you like us to invite him back to come here? So, Sabbath is already over. So without any further delays, it's 7:05. We'll give you the pulpit, and later we'll have questions and answers. There are some papers in the benches, so you can write your questions, and we are going to have a Q&A session after the presentation, where we can ask some questions and try to get some answers. So much from me. Dr. Standish, pulpit is yours. Thanks.
Before we really get into this presentation, I did want to mention, I'm very excited because there are a number of documentaries that I've worked on. Right now, the company that I work with is working on another one that's going to be really fantastic. In fact, they were just up here in Canada, admittedly the other side of Canada, filming some things about the salmon migration, the coho salmon migration here just a couple of weeks ago, and or at least a week ago, and they said they were getting some fantastic footage of that. But this particular video I worked on it's called Flight, the Genius of Birds. If you're interested in these sorts of things, these videos by Illustra Media are really some of the best things out there in terms of design in nature. I will make sure that I give a set of the materials that I at least have with you to your pastor. I don't know whether you have a church library or anything like that here, but I encourage you to take a look at these. They really are superb. And the reason I'm excited about them is that I just literally, on this trip, I had sent to me the let's call them beta versions. These are of the Spanish and French and Portuguese translations. So I'm excited to get them. They will be released here at some point. Probably they will be officially released around during July of next year. But those are exciting, and I don't know. Sometimes what you can say in a documentary is more effective than what you can say in a presentation of this sort. I don't think I have anything on the monitor down here, so I will be craning around a little bit. If I look a little bit surprised, by the way, at what shows up on your monitors, that's because, unfortunately, I didn't review this before I stood up here. However, I am familiar with the presentation, seeing as I made it. I just didn't review it at the last minute, and that's usually a good idea for me. So I want to talk a little bit about life and design. And I'm using the metaphor of a door in this presentation, the door at the end of the universe. I don't know how many of you read those books by Douglas Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the Restaurant at the End of the Universe. This isn't really a good play on that, but this metaphor of a door I want to use as we go along. Oops. So I want you to imagine a door. Now this particular door is made by the Cosmic Safe Company. And so it's a safe door. It's not a door that you can get into very easily. However, conveniently or thoughtfully, the Cosmic Safe Company has placed a combination lock onto this door. So if we want to get ourselves a universe, what we can do is we can come up with the combination on that combination lock, and then we get a universe out of the door. It looks, from what we can tell right now, like several properties have to be right in this universe if we're going to have life existing. we don't necessarily know how many of these things, and we also don't know how many numbers there are on the combination dial. What we do know is that the numbers that exist when it comes to the things like the strength of gravity and the weak force or the electroweak force and these types of things that hold the universe together, when it comes to those kinds of numbers, the precision appears to be unbelievably precise. And it looks as if things vary, there will be big problems. It will not be possible for life to exist. So there are several of these that we could cue in on. I don't know why I chose a Frenchman. But in any case, yes, our safe breaker, his name is Chancelier-toi. And so the claim is that we can get a universe, a life-friendly universe, somehow or other by unguided chance alone. And I want you to just think about that assertion a little bit. This is a common idea that's out there. Is it possible to get a life-friendly universe? I think most people would agree that the universe that we live in is pretty special when it comes to life. It's a special kind of universe. And think about something like the strength of gravity. What would happen if gravity was a little bit weaker? I mean, it would be kind of entertaining, because we'd be able to jump around like as the astronauts were able to jump around on the moon and take great big flying leaps, and I myself would be in better shape if gravity wasn't as strong as it is, because I think I mentioned to many of you that I did take a bit of a fall a few years ago, and that hurt. So making gravity somewhat weaker would be extremely convenient. But the problem is that it's hard to imagine how life could exist if gravity was weaker, because we probably wouldn't have a sun if gravity was weaker. And if we did have a sun, there probably wouldn't be a nuclear reaction going on inside that sun that powers life on Earth. So weakening gravity would be a big, big problem for life, at least here on Earth. On the other hand, what would happen if we made gravity stronger? That would, among other things, speed up the nuclear reaction that's going on inside the sun and make it very difficult for us to get this kind of balance that we have going on with our Earth, where we receive a pretty friendly amount of energy on the surface of the Earth as it rotates and travels around the sun. So just changing something like gravity would make life somewhat problematic. If you believe in Big Bang cosmology, by the way, there are a whole lot of these numbers that have to be exactly right, and gravity is only one of them when it comes to that, because things have to be balanced out exactly with the amount of energy that's being released at the time of the Big Bang, so that you wind up with a basically an expanding and inflating universe, but not one that has runaway expansion and doesn't wind up with the matter congealing into things like stars and suns, the sun and so on. So anyway, it's generally accepted that a universe like ours is hard to get, but Chancelier-toi says that he can get this door open. Is that really true? Yeah, he says, I can easily crack this safe in a zillion years. Yeah, that's my French right there, a zillion. What exactly is he claiming that he's able to do? Now, when you're talking about not having a universe in the first place, that means that you don't have any matter. There's no matter that exists. There are no atoms without a universe. Not having a universe is a kind of nothing that at least I can't really fully understand. It means having no energy. It also means having no space. Space does not exist outside of the universe. I know that's hard to think. I mean, we think of outside the universe as being something like a vacuum, but it isn't. It's much less than a vacuum. Space itself doesn't exist. It's not a vacuum outside of the universe. In addition to that, time does not exist independent of our universe. Not having a universe is incomprehensibly nothing to those of us who live in this amazingly life-friendly universe. There are no zillion years to make new universes or something until you get the right one. It doesn't, there is nothing beyond nothing. No space, no time, no energy, no matter, nothing at all to work with. Random chance does not exist outside of our universe. They're just, chance aléatoire does not exist. Off he goes. Yeah. So, maybe we have to invoke something outside of, independent of our universe to get it. Yeah. Maybe we do need something, I don't know, let's see here. Oh yeah, by the way, no laws outside of our universe either. It's not like there's natural laws to work with. I mean, there's just nothing at all to work with outside of the universe. Yeah, so let's see here. Our life-friendly universe appears to be impossible. Impossible in a kind of profound way. More profound than what we're used to thinking of. However, yes, maybe what we could invoke is an Epicurean, eternal, infinite universe. Maybe the universe didn't come into existence. Maybe it's just always been here. I mean, how is that really different from invoking an eternal God? Yeah. They just make the universe eternal. We say God's eternal. The problem is that the data do not support the idea of an eternal universe. In fact, this is simply not an option as long as Big Bang cosmology is on the table. In an eternal universe, unless you have an eternal source of power or energy, what's going to happen is the universe will basically expand to the point that it just cools down and nothing's possible. So, this kind of explanation simply doesn't work. But there is a philosophy out there that may help us, the philosophy of deism. This is the position of people like Thomas Jefferson, for example, from the United States. He was probably more or less a deist. You allow for some kind of divine intervention when it comes to getting the universe going, at least. But not necessarily the kind of God that we have in the Bible. A kind of personal God. So, anyway, the deistic God, he reaches down, He knows the combination. He opens the door to a life-friendly universe, and we look inside there. And what do we have? Well, there's all kinds of interesting things, but there's another door. Our universe may be life-friendly, but, we don't have life. Just because life can exist is not the same thing as life actually existing. Those are totally different things. So now on this door, we also have a combination lock. We have to do some things to get this door open so that we have life in our life-friendly universe. And to open the door, we actually have something to work with. It's not like getting the universe in the first place where we have nothing in a very profound way. We have matter, we have energy, we have space, and we have time. A fair amount of time and a whole lot of space and a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of matter. So we've at least got something to work with there. Let's make some assumptions. First of all, let's assume that there is a just right Earth that exists in our life-friendly universe. Does it have to be that way? No. I'll give you guys a DVD called The Privileged Planet, in which this is discussed a little bit. But there's a lot more, there's actually a much more interesting theory that's being put, or observation that's being put forward there. But let's just say, we do get a life-friendly universe. And, let's see here, I'm having a little bit of trouble reading my writing down there, so I'm going to crane around here. And we have abundant building block molecules to make big biological molecules like DNA and protein. That's making a big assumption. But let's just say that that happened. We've got an Earth, and it's covered with oceans, and those oceans are full of amino acids and nucleotides and all sorts of stuff like that, that we can then make these fabulous biological molecules that we're made out of. We'll concentrate on just production of protein biological polymers. So we need, if we're going to have living things, we need to be able to make some proteins. We've got the building blocks for proteins because proteins are made out of amino acids. So we will make ourselves some proteins. Let's see here. The big problem is that there are lots of different proteins that you can make, but very few of them are functional in any way. So getting them is a little bit of a tricky thing. So let's talk a little bit about how you make a protein. Now bear in mind that things are much more interesting than this, but we'll make things very, very simple. Here's an amino acid. And an amino acid is imaginatively named. They're named amino acids because they have an amine group and an acid group on them, a carboxylic acid group. And I'm symbolizing those with green and then pink for the acid group. If we bring in another amino acid, we can remove a water molecule and create something called a peptide bond. And we can just keep doing that. We can bring them in one after another and remove those water molecules, and lo and behold, in this particular case, they form a meaningful word, created. Now think about this, though. Try to remember back when you were in high school chemistry. And when you were talking about things like equilibria. If you have amino acids floating around in water, and water is what you have to remove to join those amino acids together, how many long strings of amino acids do you think you'll get strung together with peptide bonds? the bottom line is you do not get this happening. I mean, we routinely store amino acids in aqueous solution because they don't polymerize like this. That would be a violation of the laws of chemistry. We know how chemistry works. And even if we didn't, we can do this experiment. And by the way, we can thank God that it doesn't work. That amino acids do not just polymerize together spontaneously in an aqueous solution, because if it did happen, we would probably have random amino acids, proteins forming inside our cells all the time. And you know what we would resemble under those circumstances? Basically a fried egg. When you take an egg, the albumin in an egg, and you heat it up, what happens is the protein molecules in there that are all folded up in very nice, neat ways, they unravel. And then, when they do that, they all get tangled around each other, and you form the egg white, the cooked egg white. But before it's an egg white, it's a liquid, because the proteins are the way they're supposed to be. That is kind of the equivalent of having a whole bunch of random proteins. They will just clump together and cause big problems. At least that seems to be a reasonable assumption. The proteins have to be meaningful proteins. So actually, when you put a protein into water, what happens is you've got a whole lot of water all around the protein, and the water molecules tend to get into those peptide bonds, and what you get is them being broken down. So when you put the proteins that are in your body, they are in an aqueous environment, and they tend to break down under those circumstances. Now, thankfully, they don't do that very fast. They are amazingly stable molecules. But this is one of the reasons why you have to continually make new proteins, because they get broken down. They get unmade in water. They do not get made in water. The reason that your cells can make proteins is because they use energy to drive the chemical reactions essentially backwards. So your cells obey the laws of chemistry, but if you just had oceans full of lots of amino acids, what Charles Darwin called a little warm pond, you just do not get polymerization of amino acids. That's not the way it works. Amino acids don't spontaneously polymerize into proteins. Now, it is possible to build machines to do this. Even if they did, no natural mechanism has been found for joining monomers, the amino acids, in meaningful sequences. This requires an intelligent cause. You need information first, and then you need a mechanism for joining things together into meaningful proteins, meaningful nucleic acids like DNA, and so on. Why do cells need to make meaningful proteins? Why is that necessary? It has to do with how life is. Life runs by energy. Okay? Life, while sometimes we talk about the miracle of life, life is a miracle. However, the way life functions is the same kind of thing by the same principles that our cars function, or aeroplanes function. The laws of physics and chemistry, we do not violate them. Life operates in a state of perpetual flux, and you just gave a beautiful demonstration of this. You ate supper. Okay? That means you put chemicals, and particularly chemical energy, down your throat. Okay? Right now, your body is breaking down that food that you ate and absorbing chemicals that will be used as either building blocks to make various things inside your body, or as energy to drive reactions in different ways. This is one of the reasons why you're warm. You are using energy that you have eaten, and that energy ultimately winds up as heat that you are radiating away from your body. Chemical reactions go to equilibrium in nature, except in living things. Normally, things go to equilibrium, yeah. Living things go to equilibrium when they die. So you do not want to go to equilibrium anytime soon. And I don't want you to go to equilibrium anytime soon either. But while you're alive, you live in a constant state of chemical disequilibrium. For life to exist, molecular machines are necessary to manage the flux of energy and chemicals through cells. I don't want to admit that I've actually done this experiment, but someone I know may have, on occasion, tried lighting off some gasoline outside of an engine, car engine. And it can be an exciting thing. Not that I want to admit that I might have been involved in doing it on one or two occasions. But, yeah, if you want energy to do work, it usually requires some kind of machine to turn the energy into the work that you want to get done. You know, lighting off gasoline outside of a car doesn't do much good, although it might warm you up briefly. Lighting off gasoline inside a car engine, you know, can take you a long distance, can do a lot of work for you. Your body operates on the same principle. Okay? But you need machines to make it happen. This is what one of those machines looks like. Now, I will tell you that I personally, I drew this one. This is E. coli ATPase, or ATP synthase. And so this is actually a bacterial one that I've drawn for you here. Those little bacteria that live inside your gut that you can be so thankful for, they have zillions of these. In fact, yeah, this is not a pleasant thought, but each time you go to the bathroom, well, anyway, in one way, you flush trillions of these down the toilet. It seems like a terrible waste because they're amazing machines. You have a similar device inside yourself. For the moment, you just need to note that these are pretty complicated, amazing-looking machines. They are made out, and all of the different parts are made out of protein in this particular molecular machine. That's why you need proteins. If you're going to be living, that means you're going to be taking energy and you're going to be using it to do work. And you're going to be taking in chemicals and transforming them in various ways. You need machines to do that. That's why you need meaningful proteins, because that's what the machines are made out of, those meaningful proteins. And yeah, we will continue on there. Yeah, science is about predicting what is likely. Chemistry predicts that significant amino acid polymerization will not occur in an aqueous solution unless you set up machinery to make that happen, like the machinery inside your cells. Science also predicts that random protein polymers will not be useful and will, in fact, most likely be harmful to life. Materialistic origin of life scenarios, like Darwinism, predict what does not happen. You know, I used to be quite interested in probability arguments, and you've probably heard them, and they're not necessarily bad, but figuring out the probability of getting a meaningful protein given, whatever, and you find out that they are very, 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 very improbable things. But the problem is, you're imagining something happens that doesn't happen. Imagining getting a meaningful protein out of a solution that contains amino acids is like imagining rolling a 7 with a 6-sided dice. This is just not what happens. This is not what we predict. Scientists are in fact prophets. The difference between prophets in the Bible and scientists as prophets is scientists predict in a very boring way. We predict what happens all the time. Yeah? So if I take something, I've got to have something here in my pocket. It's an American dime. I predict as a scientist that when I let go of this dime, it is going to hit the floor. And you know what? Look at that. There it goes. It does it. That's a scientist being a prophet for you. That's what scientists do. Scientists do not predict unlikely things. They predict likely things. This is one of the reasons that you can know that Darwinism is, in fact, a philosophical commitment, a religious program, a kind of faith project. It's not based on actually what we know, particularly when it comes to things like the origin of life. So, there are only 2 known ways in which proteins are made, meaningful proteins, useful proteins. One, molecular factories inside cells, using information that's encoded in DNA, or in chemist laboratories. And by the way, the chemists are geniuses who do this sort of thing. So there's a kind of intelligence in the way that we know about, and why would we not think that there is an intelligence in the way that they're made inside cells? So let's see here. We need to go a little bit beyond our deistic God, who made the life-friendly universe and stepped away from it. We need a God who is willing to work a little bit with the matter to actually create life and get this life safe open. I would point out to you that this sounds very much like the God of the Bible. Here in Genesis 2:7 it says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." God got his hands dirty. Something like that seems to be necessary to get life in the first place. So now we've managed to open our door and we have some living things. But how do we get different kinds of living things? It would be a pretty boring world if everything was just one kind of organism. How do we get new kinds of organisms? And I want to show you or use just one trivial example. And that trivial example is the production of a blue rose. Has anybody here ever seen a blue rose? Yeah. There are a number of ways that you can make a blue rose. Okay? So now we will talk about how you do that. Yeah. It turns out that using selection to make blue roses doesn't work. The problem is that, unlike every American teenager, roses lack blue genes. Yeah. They just simply don't have the genetic information for making blue pigment. It's not there. So you can select roses. If you're a plant breeder, you can select and select and select and select, but you're not going to get a blue rose. You can't get what isn't there. So, making blue roses requires engineering the rose genome. Oh, there is one other way, two other ways that I've discovered actually of doing it. One, apparently with some kinds of roses, if they're white roses, if you put the blue food coloring in their water, some of them might suck it up and you get some blue up there. And I think I've seen that done. It's more commonly done with white carnations. Yeah. Anyway, that's one way of making them, but it's not a particularly natural or satisfying way. I'm talking about a rose that you can plant a seed and grow a rose plant, or, excuse me, make a cutting from or something and grow it up. That requires engineering the rose genome, and in fact we know exactly how to do it because it has been done. I might add, by brilliant Australian plant scientists. Yeah. It wasn't as easy as you would think to do. I believe they took a gene from irises, blue irises, and put it into white roses or something, and then they had to figure out how to turn on that gene at the right, in the right part of the rose, the rose plant. Obviously, you want it turned on in the flower, but it's pretty useless to turn it on inside the, in the leaves or in the stem or the thorns or whatever. It takes a lot of work to do that. You could just dye the roses blue, dip them into some kind of blue dye. This here is a picture of a real blue rose. Now, I should tell you that what happened with this was this. I am the best husband in the world. And my wife casually mentioned to me one day that she'd like to put some roses in front of our house. So I thought, my wife shall have roses. And I went down to the plant nursery, and I was looking through the various roses, trying to pick out some that I thought my wife would approve of and enjoy. And lo and behold, there was a rose that was labeled a blue rose. And I knew I had to own it immediately. And this is what I got. And I should tell you that this is not exactly the healthiest rose. It grows quite slowly. All the other roses grow all over it, and I have to keep, pruning them back while it struggles on. It's gotten a little bit better now that it's gotten bigger, but it's just simply not a really healthy rose. I suspect that this is actually a product of selective breeding. But does that look like a blue rose to you? No, it's sort of a disappointingly mauve-ish kind of rose. My suspicion is that what's going on there is that the pH has been altered through selective breeding, and sometimes with these pigments, when you alter the pH, the pigment will change in color a little bit. But in any case, that doesn't look like a very blue rose to me, so I think it was false advertising, and I'm thinking of suing the nursery. Here is a blue rose. This is another way of making a blue rose. I used Photoshop to make that particular one there. See, that Photoshop blue rose is what a blue rose should look like to me. So, let's see here. To get something new, some novel new trait like blueness in roses, how do we get that to happen? We've actually done the experiment. You genetically engineer the rose genome, and that takes brilliant Australians, as it turns out. Yeah. It doesn't appear as if nature is capable of making new genes. Roses have been around for a long time. Anyone who could have come up with a natural, genuinely blue rose would have made a lot of money. But it hasn't happened. Yeah. Whether natural or artificial selection is used is irrelevant. Blue roses, new genes, don't come into existence spontaneously. So what we need is a God. Okay? This is a God who actually, yes, works with individual kinds of organisms. That sounds amazingly like the God who is in the Bible. Here in Genesis 2:19, and out of the ground God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. So God created different kinds of organisms with novel genes in them, encoded in their DNA. So they were different kinds of things. That's where the diversity came from. Now, I believe that he created these organisms with the ability, the built-in ability to vary in different ways. And that's why we can see so much variation in different kinds of organisms. Human beings are a beautiful example of it. Some of us are tall, some of us are short. Some of us have blonde hair, some of us get it out of a bottle. Some of us... Oh, did I just say that? Some of us have curly hair. Some of us have straight hair. Some of us have light skin. Some of us have dark skin. All kinds of variability. And you know what? Those things do not have to come from some kind of weird mutation that happened or anything like that. Organisms naturally vary in these kinds of ways. And we are no exception to that. That's why we can get so many different variations of roses, so many different variations, so many different kinds of corn. It's quite amazing. So many different things. So here are some conclusions. Both creationists and materialists seem to converge on suspension of nature's laws to explain life. The difference is that ultimately both invoke a miracle, but the difference is creationists admit this, while Darwinists do not. I mean, just by saying something isn't a miracle doesn't make it not a miracle. By claiming that natural processes can achieve things does not mean that natural processes can actually do it, particularly when there's no experimental or at least encouraging experimental evidence that shows that to be the case. The Bible, our experience of God's providence, and the creation itself all provide evidence of the existence of a God who plays an active role in his creation. It's quite remarkable. Yeah. So there's one more door that I want you to consider. Yeah. This is the door to the human heart and mind. Yeah. This is the door that I would call the door at the end of the universe. God says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me." The difference between this door and the other doors that we've talked about is there is no lock, no combination lock on the outside. The way to open this particular door is from the inside. God is amazingly polite. He stands out there knocking and asks us to open the doors of our hearts to him. And my prayer is that that is precisely what each one of us will do. Thank you. Okay. Shall we move this? You got it? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just toss these. Here, in fact, I'm going to put them down here or I'll forget them. All right, so we have some questions.
Sure. Just make sure that our mics are working.
And if anyone has any new questions, our ushers are available with the beautiful purple scarf to pick it up.
Okay, so good. Our mics are working. Thank you so much for all of these presentations. You were mentioning that if we didn't have this, we wouldn't have a space, we wouldn't have time or anything. Can we just maybe clarify and, can we claim that actually creation of universe was creation of time and space?
Yes. Yes.
Creation of universe wasn't creation of universe in a time, it was creation of time itself as well.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
So are you relating that to the creation story in the book of Genesis, or are you suggesting another outside of that?
Well, actually, I'm relating that to the creation story of Genesis. I have my Bible here. I think it's interesting. Paul once mentions in Hebrews that creation of our universe, usually we use word cosmos, and in Greek it would be cosmos, but he's using another word, aion, which means creation of time. So maybe we can call him first quantum cosmologist to say that. So I was wondering if we say that, it was creation of time. When we think of God who is creating time, it puts God basically outside of time, above time. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about God, we've heard questions like if God knew, or what was there before there was time. Can we ask these kind of questions, and how much are we limited, of understanding of a God, because we are in a time and He's outside of time? It looks to me that our computer kind of crashes when we try to leave this boundary of time and space.
Trying to comprehend, there are certain questions, I guess, that you can ask that might be productive. They either, can be, there's at least a theoretical possibility of answering the certain questions in a way that might be satisfying. But then there are questions that we're quite capable of asking that there's no truly reasonable possibility of answering. And as a consequence of that, we're simply, if nothing else, we're just wasting our time. Mm-hmm. By what you can do is you can speculate about them. So I will give you an example. Certain, when you start going back in your genealogy, there are some people that can take. I guess that technically, I could probably trace my family genealogy at least back to the time of William the Conqueror, 1066. Wow. I'm not sure how precisely I could do that, but there's a good record of Standishes, and you can follow it back quite a way. On the other hand, other lines in my family, after one or two generations, literally, I have no idea who my ancestors were. There are no records. So, for example, one of my mother's great-grandfathers, we believe that he was born in the Docklands area there near London. Mm-hmm. Those were all bombed to nothing in the Second World War. We have no records of his existence. We don't know anything beyond the time that he shows up, I believe, in New Zealand. That's it. Oh no, we have a military record from him in the Crimean War. But that's it. We know nothing. There is no possibility of knowing more. So I could sit around and speculate that his parents or his grandfather's name was John Savage. But what? That's meaningless. That's just a speculation. And with these kinds of questions, you can consume yourself with them, but what's the point? Mm-hmm. You're not going to get an answer. Maybe you'll get an answer from God, mm-hmm. but we can't know, not through human means.
The reason why I asked that, because last week we had a different presenter here, and at one point we came to thinking and conclusion and discussion that we have limitations. And you were also saying today that the fact that we cannot understand something, and the fact that maybe they couldn't understand a certain part of DNA, and they right away said it's a junk, doesn't mean it's a junk. Maybe the fact that we're just limited and we cannot understand something that's beyond us, that's outside of our dimensions of space and time, doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist and it's a junk. No. That's why I asked this question. Yes. So maybe just to put us in proper perspective.
I think that you're probably heading in the right direction. There are a number of things, and again, I want to be careful. I am speculating here, but I think about the idea of the millennium. Jesus comes, we all go up to heaven for this millennium, for this 1,000 years, right? And during that time, I know many, at least I believe, we are going to be actually looking into some of these questions that we can't have answers to. I don't know why God chose to allow my father to be killed in such a violent way, and when, I believe he was a pretty good man, and, as far as human beings go, and he was certainly seeking to serve God and all of those things. He had a family who would still have enjoyed his company and all of those things. I don't understand it. But I can ask those questions there with some hope of actually getting an actual answer. Mm-hmm. Whereas at this particular point in time, I can't expect to, and it's a frustrating thing. I'm a scientist. I like to have answers to things, mm-hmm. But I don't think you have to be a scientist to be that way.
Thank you.
I have one here from the crowd. What do you think about gap theory in Genesis 1?
Yeah, there are different flavors of gap theory. And again, I need to give a disclaimer. I am not a theologian. I am not a biblical scholar. I am a scientist. Some people, get quite excited about gap theory. Gap theory, there are a number of different kinds of gap theories, but the most popular one in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the idea that the book of Genesis starts out with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then basically there's a gap after that that could be, that was back in the beginning that God did that, and then God comes at some later date. It might be 1 billion years later, it might be 13.5 billion years later, we don't know. And he starts forming the earth so that it can support life, and then filling it with life. That's the basic idea. And for some people, like physicists, they struggle with things like, how can we have this light that has traveled such a great distance across the universe, and then there are questions about why would God make it that way to fool us that the universe looks like it's really old when it's really young. To be honest with you, and I know this, not everybody's going to agree with me on this. Please don't come and attack me afterwards for saying this. But from my perspective as a biologist, I don't really see that it makes too much difference. The big issue in my mind is this issue of death before sin. Either in Romans 5, Paul is laying out something logical and coherent, that Adam's sin introduced death, suffering, and misery into the world. And Jesus Christ's victory over sin is what can give us victory over death and suffering and all of those sorts of things. Either that's the way things are, or you have death before sin. So the big thing with me is, how do you account for that fossil record? Gap theory doesn't seem to be helpful in that respect. If those fossils really do represent things that were produced over the course of, many hundreds of millions, billions of years, then there's a bit of a problem, in my mind, with things. So, if somebody wants to be excited about it, that's fine as far as I'm concerned. I think that you can do that in a biblically consistent way, but I don't think that it truly helps with the really hard questions that I as a biologist have to struggle with.
So I guess that would be potentially more of an answer to why rock looks so old, or why the inanimate
Possibly.
parts of our world seem to be
Possibly,
aged.
yes.
Okay.
And certainly out there in the universe.
Right.
Just maybe follow up to that. Maybe it's not hugely related, but I see some correlation there. So when we open up the Bible, we see creation of a life on our planet here. Is the age of a life and age of a universe, are these created at the same time? We know that many people believe that life on earth is very young.
Yeah.
Young in terms like that, some people propose it is. And can we say that life and universe, they're same age, or maybe universe was already there and then life was brought into existence after, and we can claim that life is young, but universe maybe not necessarily, or they're both young?
In my mind, it doesn't make a lot of difference. Now, there are a lot of people who really want to fight about this, so I want to be careful. I don't want to offend anybody. But, there are people who say, well, look at Exodus 20. In Exodus 20, in the fourth commandment, let's see, I want to go to about verse 8. You have God saying, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. So he made heaven, and he made earth, and the sea, and all that in them is. Well, there's all the stars and everything up in the heavens, so therefore God must have made them in 6 days. Well, if he did, and by the way, I'm certainly not uncomfortable with this, he made them look old. Or at least there's evidence in there that appears, yes. There are obviously other kinds of comebacks that you can have for this sort of thing. When God created, everything had to have an apparent age. I mean, Adam apparently was a grown man when he was born. And of course, people then can debate about whether Adam had a belly button and things like that. Whether or not he had a belly button, he was a grown man. And Eve was a grown woman. And how old that made them look. I mean, what about the trees that were there in the Garden of Eden? Did they have rings in them? Did they have tree rings? Nowadays, we would say, well, a tree with rings, that indicates it's a certain number of years old. So if the tree of life happened to have tree rings, what would that mean? Well, I don't see how you could make trees without tree rings. You see, so there has to be some kind of apparent age in the creation, no matter what. God, if God made the universe a whole lot younger, and if Big Bang cosmology is true. I'm personally not willing to commit to it. I wouldn't be surprised if someone comes up with a different idea in my lifetime. But let's say it is true, and all of this is correct. If the universe was a lot younger looking, life couldn't exist on it. It just has to do with certain things like the amount of radiation that's kicking around out there and all sorts of things like that.
Oxygen.
So the universe happens to appear to be about the right age so that things have calmed down. It's not too old and it's not too young. We live in a
For life to
Goldilocks
appear.
universe. Yeah.
Excellent.
Another topic. So do you have something similar?
I just have a question from audience here, maybe if you can address it briefly. Can you briefly explain the problem with dating methods used to show that fossils are millions of years old?
Briefly. First of all, let me give the disclaimer. I'm a biologist. I'm not a physicist, and I'm not a geologist, and I'm not a paleontologist, okay? So just bear that in mind. Here is the basic issue that we're dealing with. When we're talking about millions of years, we are not talking about carbon dating. Okay? Carbon-14 dating is only good for, at a maximum, something like around 100,000 years. And that's only using the most recent techniques in the best labs and under the most ideal conditions. In the cases of millions of years, typically what's done is this. You have a layer of volcanic rock, and then you have a layer of sedimentary rock of some kind that has fossils in it, and then above that you have a layer of volcanic rock, maybe volcanic ash or something along those lines. And so what you do is you do radiometric dating, maybe potassium argon or uranium lead or rubidium strontium or one of these alternative kinds of dating methods that, at least in theory, can give you dates in the millions or hundreds of millions or billions of years. So you date the layer below and you date the layer on top, and you presumably get different dates, and the one on top would be the younger one, because there's this thing called the law of superposition. That says that there's a layer of rock laid down, and then the next layer of rock lays down afterwards on top of it. You don't get new layers of rock being laid down underneath old layers of rock. So the higher you come in these layers of rock, the younger the rock should be, right? So you've got these two layers that you have radiometric dates for, and in between are the fossils. So you can say, well, if this layer down here says it's 100 million years old, and this layer up here says it's 50 million years old, then the fossils in between must have formed between 50 and 100 million years ago. That's one way of doing it. But the problem is that it's not always an easy thing to find two layers like that. So then what they do is they say, well, where we find similar fossils or similar collections of fossils, we know that the ones over there, well, we know that the ones over there are 50 to 100 million years old. So if we find the same thing over here, it's probably 50 to 100 million years old as well. So that's sort of, it's based on, reasonable logic. However, obviously, I believe that there are certain problems with it. I cannot tell you why radiometric dating doesn't work. However, the bottom line is pretty much everybody throws out radiometric dates that they think are wrong for various reasons. So when a regular normal geologist goes and does radiometric dating on some samples, if the samples come out with ridiculous numbers, they will throw out those radiometric dates. But if the radiometric dates are within reason in their understanding of things, then they will keep them. So there is a little bit of selecting that goes on there. Sometimes radiometric dates give what are considered to be impossible dates. So I will give you an example. Some people have been going around actually doing carbon-14 dating on carbon samples from different levels in the geologic column. This is led by a group at the Institute for Creation Research. But they're not totally alone with this. There are some people who I know who are Adventists who've been involved with this. And what they've done is they've tested everything from diamonds, which are made out of pure carbon, obviously, to coal that's supposed to be 200 and something million years old. And lo and behold, you find that they give carbon-14 dates. Now remember, carbon-14 can only measure back to maybe 100,000 years. But they are giving much younger dates than that. They're not saying 6,000 years old, okay, or 4,000 years old and formed in the flood. But they are much younger dates than even 100,000 years. So, a creationist says, well, there you go. This coal that's dated by other people at 200 and something million years old is actually more like a few tens of thousands of years old, and they also have some explanations about why that coal might be dating that way. On the other hand, you have Darwinists. For example, the guy who used to be the head of the carbon-14 lab at UC Riverside. He's an interesting character and is very willing to give his opinion on these things, and claims to be a Seventh-day Adventist. But he responds in various ways. He maybe attributes it to contamination and other things. So, people who believe in this long chronology, they throw out those carbon-14 dates, and yet at the same time they say you shouldn't disbelieve the Bible because of these other carbon-14 dates or you should disbelieve the Bible because of other, so why should I believe the carbon-14 dates that go against the Bible?
We're coming down to paradigms.
Yeah, and not believe the ones that support the idea of a short chronology.
So then, if you can quickly give your opinion on this, how old can we presume the world is? That kind of goes back to all these questions now.
Yeah.
I mean, is that possible to guess, or is it just we have to separate the Earth versus age of life?
As I said, my concern is how old is life, or more importantly, how old is death?
Right.
And I believe that the Bible is a reasonable record of what's occurred in history. I believe that those genealogies that are present in the Bible are, reasonably accurate. I also understand as a scientist that there is going to be a level of error in there. And I have to be careful there. I'm using the term error in a technical sense. I don't mean that the numbers are wrong. What I mean is there is a lack of precision in those numbers. So when the genealogies say so-and-so begat so-and-so and they were such and such a year old when they did that, the problem is that if, I'm 52 years old, but that gives a range. That's an approximate date. My birthday could have been today, or it could have been yesterday, or it could have been 364 days ago. There's a range in it, and you can't know. That's the error, the potential error in there. So when you start adding up a whole bunch of numbers with a certain amount of potential, a range of time that they actually represent, you get an increase in the amount of potential error in there. So trying to pin things down to the exact date of 4004 BC, frankly, is not justified by the data. I don't claim to be an expert in biblical genealogies and adding them up and all of those sorts of things. Usually what I say to people is, I suspect that life on Earth is less than 10,000 years old. That eliminates a whole lot of, frankly, silly arguments that I've been presented with. If Jesus comes back and says, well, sorry, you added things up wrong and it's actually 10,001 years old, I won't ask to be kicked out of heaven as a result of that. I suspect, however, that it's significantly less than 10,000 years.
There are new questions.
We have a question here. If Adam and Eve were one race or same race, I guess, how do we now have different races?
Yes. I'm assuming that this question relates to how do we get the kind of morphological variability that we see between races, the significant range in skin color, or the things like that. And let me give you a trivial explanation, but it kind of illustrates why this is not a great issue. Each of us got one set of human DNA from our mother and one set of human DNA from our father. So each of us has two sets of human DNA in our bodies, in every one of our cells basically. And when you have two people, a husband and a wife, let's call them Adam and Eve, how many sets of human DNA do you have in two people? Yeah, that's right, I'm holding up exactly the right number of fingers. How many letters were there in the DNA alphabet? There was A, T, G, and C. That's 4 letters, right? So if you have 4 sets of DNA, at any point in those sets of DNA, you can actually represent the entire universe of possibilities. You really do not need more than 2 people to represent every possibility at any point in a chromosome when it comes to point differences. Now, the reality is significantly more complex than that, but it's also, in my opinion, significantly less troubling. Even there. Getting the different races out of 2 people is not a problem, and I will tell you, this is something that I'm actually kind of gets my goat a little bit. Okay, so if I seem a little bit cross, I'm not angry with you, but the idea that races are the result of some mutation that may have made some people more fit and other people less fit is frankly revolting. And that kind of reasoning is what has led to genocide after genocide after genocide in this world. And I personally think that it's something that all Christians should absolutely reject. Yeah.
Well, on the topic of male and female, I guess that's where that question started. We have a question that says, how would cells separate into male and female? I guess we're assuming from a Darwinian perspective at the beginning.
Yes.
If you have one cell, that you have a life, how would that divide and recreate without another cell, i.e. no opposite sex necessary? How do Darwinians explain this?
I think that most people recognize that the development of sexual reproductive systems is an issue for Darwinism. And to be honest with you, this is not something that I've studied an awful lot. I mean, I know that it is recognized as an issue. Years ago, I remember looking at a few things. They didn't seem overly plausible to me. but it's not as if it's an idea that people are not aware of.
It just hasn't
But-
necessarily been tackled? Or?
Well, I think people have tried a few sort of theoretical tacks on it, but it doesn't seem like anyone's dancing in the street and rejoicing because that particular problem is solved.
Okay. So we just don't know.
Well,
Or
a
they
Darwinist
don't.
might be able to make up a story, but here's the problem. With any of these sorts of things, you can always make up a story. We can make up a story, and a Darwinist can make up a story as well. Remember, the trick is to, or what a viewer or someone who's listening to one of these things needs to do is to actually evaluate the story. Just because there's a story there doesn't mean that it's true. Frequently, you can differentiate between these things simply on the basis of plausibility. It is true that there are plenty of organisms that reproduce quite successfully asexually. So the cells just keep dividing and so on. Some of them are multi-celled organisms. But it's also true that sexual reproduction, and the great thing about sexual reproduction is that you have genetic recombination that goes on during sexual reproduction. That's what's really good about it. That's how you develop and maintain diversity in groups of organisms. It makes organisms much less vulnerable to environmental changes. It makes them populations capable of responding to changes in their environments. It's really, really a good thing. Everybody agrees about that, but precisely the mechanism by which it came about, I'm sure that there are people who are thinking very hard about it. But as I said, I don't claim any expertise. Some people probably think they have an answer. I suspect that.
But you haven't been satisfied with anything that's.
I haven't been
so-
satisfied with anything that I've heard, but it's been a long time since I actually looked at this question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have more if you. I know I
think-
have an eager 11-year-old in the crowd that had a question.
Ooh,
11.
let's get to that one.
Yes.
Yeah, I would, 11-year-old, I think we would give them a chance, and with that we'll wrap up our Q&A tonight.
Okay.
So,
Okay. We had a young girl who wanted to know, how did God put all the animals in the ark,
Okay.
logistically?
Again, my disclaimer is I'm not an expert on the ark. However, there are a couple of things that we can keep in mind. Number one, the ark was actually an amazingly large boat according to the dimensions that are provided in the Bible. Can we know exactly how big it was? Probably not, because it depends on exactly what was meant by a cubit. And apparently there was some variation in what a cubit meant. But no matter how you do it, it was a big, big boat. The other thing that we need to consider is, what does the Bible exactly say went onto the ark? When usually you hear the story of the ark told, you'll sort of end up with the impression that all of the insects were on the ark, and all of the spiders were on the ark, and all of the worms were on the ark, and all of the, and so on. That's not really what the Bible seems to be saying. It repeatedly uses the term, the expression, something to the effect of everything with the breath of life in it. So we need to understand what precisely is meant by that term, because it was those organisms that wound up on the ark. Now we know for absolutely certain that there were some birds on the ark. So presumably birds had the breath of life in them, because how do we know that they were there? Because that's what Noah was able to release, right, there towards the end of the flood. So there were birds on there, and furthermore, there were apparently sheep and so on, because that's what Noah sacrificed afterwards. So birds and mammals seem to have been on the ark. They were included among those things. My understanding, and again, first the disclaimer, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but what I've been told is that when the terminology that is used refers pretty much to what we would call terrestrial quadrupeds today. These are vertebrate animals that walk around on the earth using 4 limbs. Okay? So that would be the mammals, the birds, the reptiles, possibly the amphibians. But that's about it. So we're not talking about the zillions, we're not talking about Noah trying to get 1 million different beetles, species of beetle onto the ark. Now, furthermore, when you start looking at the terrestrial vertebrates, while we have many different species that we recognize today, it's generally recognized with a lot of these, at least, that they really are descended from common ancestors. So if you look at wolves, for example, wolves and dogs are essentially the same animal. Most people believe that domestic dogs are descended from wolves. And yet we call them different species. Canis lupus and Canis lupus familiaris, or it depends on who the taxonomist is and so on. But domestic dogs, they came from wolves. But what about the other kinds of wild dogs? Did they all come from wolves as well? Well, possibly. So when you start looking at the various species of animals out there, many of them seem to have reasonably recently, I'm now arguing 4,000 years ago, recently is maybe a little bit difficult, but it depends, of course, on who you talk to. All the cows, for example, buffaloes happily interbreed with cows, yaks happily interbreed with cows, Highland cattle in Scotland happily interbreed with them, water buffalo, I believe, and then wild buffaloes in I don't know which of these kinds of animals don't happily interbreed, but conceivably all of them could have relatively recently descended from one kind of organism that was actually on the ark. And so if you start looking at the number of families of organisms that potentially might be represented there, you're talking about relatively few animals. Now, sometimes people have a concern about organisms like dinosaurs. How on earth did God get these gigantic, super duper big organisms on there? And it's not inconceivable that you could fit them on there as adults. However, they are pretty big organisms. And, so conceivably they could have been put on there as juveniles, for example, or in some other way. And we don't know exactly what all these animals did during the flood. They were brought to the ark in some sort of supernatural way. So precisely what happened after that, we don't know. I imagine that Noah and his family would have been very busy taking care of all of these creatures. There are questions about how could you fit all the food on. But you can always, it's not overly difficult to appreciate that, maybe they could have all been, or many of them could have hibernated or something during that time and stuff like that. I kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable giving you answers like that because it's kind of speculative, and you probably gathered I don't like speculation very much. However, just bear in mind the ark is a big thing, and the number of organisms that were on there is not something like every species alive today. The species that we see alive today probably represent a lot more organisms than what was potentially on the ark, as far as the way the Bible expresses things.
Oh, wonderful.
Dr.
Thank you.
Standish, thank you for a really inspiring and interesting weekend where you showed us the beauty of creation and Creator. And I'm hoping it won't be too long before you see in our church again. And I would like to invite our Elder Milan to say final goodbye to you. And thank you for being with us and staying the whole day today here.
You guys are brave. You're like marathon runners.
And
Yeah.
sure.
I'm not sure who's the marathon runner because, at least sitting in the pews over there, occasionally I could shut my eyes and take a break. But you were up here the whole time, and you were going like an
Machine.
Energizer. What's that?
Energizer Bunny.
That's the one. That's the
I
one.
was feeling more like
and-
Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
Wasn't he notorious for doing 6-hour speeches and things? Yeah.
Fantastic. Anyways, it was a pleasure having you here. I learned a few things that are going to help me think things through. I was saying over lunch that even the idea of, we know what we know, and then what we don't know we have to be careful with.
Yeah.
And I appreciated you saying things like that. I think it was last night that you said it.
Probably at some point.
Yeah, there was a few things that are going to be very memorable for me, and I'm sure for everybody else here. And it was a pleasure having you here. We do hope that you'll come again, and we hope that you have a safe trip home. And tell your wife thank you for lending you to us for the weekend.
Hopefully the next time I'm here I can bring my wife with me. We'll see.
Sounds good. Sounds
Yeah.
good. Do I hear an amen?
Amen.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to be here. God bless you all. I will be praying that your faith has been strengthened and not compromised in any way. If I've said something, that you believe is inconsistent with the Scripture, my advice to you is to stick with the Scriptures, because I'm much more likely to be wrong. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And I will leave a set of these DVDs for your church. So, those of you who are interested in these things, by all means, let me enjoy them, or go ahead and enjoy them.